Hello folks, welcome to the next video for week 2 of MU111. We're going to be talking about figured bass, okay? There's a certain mystery around figured bass for those of you that perhaps aren't that familiar with it. I'm sure some of you will have studied it before. Some people submitted exercises last week with figured bass, so thanks for that. But this video is more going to be trying to dispel some of the sort of anxieties that I often find about figured bass, the stuff that I normally hear from students as well. So not only am I going to talk you through a little bit about the sort of numbers, it's all about numbers. I've titled this video Music by Numbers, which is pretty much what figured bass is. But I'm more concerned about description. So by the end of this video, I want you to be thinking in the mindset that figured bass is more describing music rather than numbers and patterns that you need to remember. Okay? Reasons for that will be clear. Okay. So I am starting with the history of figured bass. Not the entire history, but the reasons why we have it. So as with much music theory, this is something that evolved over a very long time. But in a nutshell, figured bass was a way to simplify printed music. Okay, so it comes from accompaniment, normally continuo textures. So stereotypically we might think of perhaps harpsichord accompaniment. Okay, and for that, an extract might give the bass line. So something that, say, a cello would play. And then you'd have numbers along with those bass notes of what the chords above would be. And then a skilled continuo player would fill in the gaps. Okay? The numbers themselves just describe the chords, and we're going to go through examples of how that is, why we do that. But historically, that's why. We saved money, and it also meant that a really skilled continuo player can essentially improvise their own parts. If you've ever tried it, it's difficult, but a really great accompaniment continuo player, it's amazing to hear, really, especially if you look at the printed page. Okay, if I say that figured bass is music by numbers, what do I mean by that? Okay, let's look at inversions, like we covered last week, and C major. Okay, so if we have root position, remember we have the root, third, and fifth. We're then going to describe the intervals. Okay, so the numbers in figured bass are describing the intervals from the lowest note to the top. So I'm going to tell you the root position figured bass is 5-3. Okay, those are the intervals that we have. 3 notes, so there's 2 intervals. And obviously from C to G is 5, C to E is 3. That's it. That's the principle of figured bass. It's describing the intervals from the lowest note. Okay, so root position 5-3. Very often in figured bass rules, we just leave it blank actually for root position. Okay, but sometimes 5-3 just to be clear. All right, it's describing those intervals. So the same logic then goes for first inversion. Okay, if you have E, the lowest, so that's the third is the lowest note, E, G, C. The intervals E to C, 6, and E to G, 3. 6, 3 for first inversion. And then second inversion, G, C, E, G to E, 6, G to C, 4. If you're ever in doubt about a figured bass, just count the intervals, okay? In my experience, where people go wrong is memorizing those combinations. We might be able to recognise inversion first and then think about figured bass later. Oh, I can recognise that's in first inversion. I think I remember that the figured bass for first inversion is this. And normally people get that wrong. Or that's where people get it wrong when they're trying to memorise figured bass. My tip is for you to just count every time. It can't go wrong. In the same way, checking key signatures, if you use my tips from last week, if you count with figured bass, you can't go wrong. Okay? So those are your basic inversions. A suspension is another one you might encounter. Suspension might sound like this. And if I notate that up, it'll look like this. And obviously that's a 4-3 suspension, that C note being the 4 above the G major chord. And we notate it just like this, a 4 and then a 3. So a 4-3 suspension. That's giving us important harmonic information. Like we talked about last week, that suspension is technically a dissonance, but it's a sort of melodic dissonance. It has a harmonic function, normally around cadences. So we'd write that in with figured bass as well. The other really important thing we need to know about figured bass is 4-note chords. So the Stereotypical one of those is a dominant seventh. I'm going to go for that. So this is the dominant seventh in F major, but it's still around C major as a chord. So C, E, G, B flat, that's just 7, 5, 3, normally written as just 7. Okay? That's the implication of root position, 7th chord. Then E, G, B flat, C, that's obviously 6, 5, and then eventually 3. Normally we just leave out a few numbers, that's just 6, 5. Okay? 6, 5 for first inversion 7th. Next one, G, B flat, C, E, 6, 4, 3, normally written as just 4, 3. Again, you can leave in the numbers if you want to be sure, but you need to be aware of these sort of shorthands. And then the final one, the third inversion, you can only get a 7th or a 4-note chord, B flat, C, E, G, is then 6, 4, 2. So normally just written as 4, 2 as well. Okay? I'm not expecting you to memorize those. I think with enough practice, they will assimilate into your memory. But my advice is to always count up those intervals, okay? Figured bass is describing music by numbers, and we just count the intervals. Lowest note to the highest, and then work down, okay? It is as simple as that. It requires practice, but it is not the most difficult thing that lots of people think about, okay? I'm not encouraging you to memorize all the different ones for different inversions. I'd be more interested in you just practicing, okay? So that sets you up for exercises for this week, which include Roman numerals, but also figured bass especially. We'll have another video which will be about harmonizing Bach chorales. Okay, folks, thanks very much. See you in the next video.